Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to another Red Pill Religion podcast. Red Pill Religion, where amongst the many things we say are that politics, culture, and religion always go together and cannot be separated. Get used to it. Please support our work, by the way, on redpillreligion.com. Redpillreligion.com is where we are updating content every day. Our team of volunteers and friends. In these days of social media censorship, with channels getting taken out all the time, please remember you can always find us on redpillreligion.com, where we could also use your spiritual and financial support, where we do take donations through PayPal, Patreon, which we keep having trouble with. We encourage, if you don't do Patreon, we love recurring payments in PayPal, and we're very grateful for those. We're also available on Maker Support and Bitcoin, so please feel free to give us some support here. Also, check us out on Gab AI at Red Pill Religion, on Maker Support at Red Pill Religion, on our Facebook group, Red Pill Religion. Please come by and say hi to us there. And but most of all, remember we're on redpillreligion.com. Okay, so tonight we have a guest. We do this periodically. We just bring in a YouTuber we find interesting, and we do an interview with them. It's always informal, and it's no big deal. Pragmatic Culture had appeared out of nowhere on one of our streams the other day. You were welcome, but I'm like, okay, who's this guy? We're going to bring him in, and we're going to learn about him. You did have some good insights to have. But also joining us are our good friend and one of our moderators, the gay atheist, anarchist, degenerate, ANCAP. I can't keep track, but he has applied all these labels to himself. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
All right, excellent. Always glad to see you. And we also have founding team member and manager at Red Pill Religion, Jean-Baptiste. Say hi to everybody, Jean-Baptiste.
Hello, everybody.
And and Eric, who has joined us for a stream or two and has been a Facebook friend. And hi, Eric.
Hi, guys.
All right, Eric. And so, Pragmatic. I've been looking at your channel, and I look at some of the introductory videos. What would you say Pragmatic Culture is all about?
Basically a verbal audio diary, an audio diary for me in some sense, in that I just want to shout into the void and get my opinions out there, partially because I'm a narcissist and I want people to agree with me, but also because I think what I'm spreading, I'd like it to gain more traction, and I'd like more people to believe what I believe. And I'm interested in sharing that discussion with whoever is willing to discuss it with me. That's why most of it is, conversations with other people as opposed to me streaming by myself, because I prefer, talking and discussing certain things as opposed to just me going on and on.
No, that makes sense. Now I understood. Did you used to be an anarcho-capitalist? I didn't quite get that straight.
Yeah, I used to be, like, you go back for like the first, I don't know how many videos I have up. It was a few, but I think if you go back to like the first like 10 or so, maybe 12, I'm pretty solidly in ANCAP, I believe. And, it started off as sort of just pure Rothbardian. Like, I had just read my big conversion moment, so to speak. Yeah, all of these kind of was reading, whatchamacallit. Which book was it? Oh, yeah, it was the last part of Murray Rothbard's sort of magnum opus, Man, Economy, and State. This was the addendum, Power and Market, which I just finished reading. And I decided, before I was kind of just a Ron Paul libertarian, and after that I decided, well, okay, forget government and all that nonsense. I'll just be ANCAP entirely. And then I started reading Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. And that's sort of where I started bending a little bit more towards a authoritarian, quote unquote, bent. Yeah. And from there into more sort of traditionalism and absolutism. I've been able to talk a lot with a fellow online who you guys have probably heard of, True Dill Tom, and he's introduced me to a lot of sources and stuff, and I've taken a lot from things he said. So now I lean more towards the old absolutist monarchies of Europe, or some form of like more traditional governance and things like that. But always throughout all of this, always been a Catholic, and I've always tried to justify my political views in the view of church moral teaching.
It is interesting. Now, I'm not a cradle Catholic, so I don't necessarily instinctively think like one. It sounds like you must be pretty serious about it. Some people are raised Catholic, but it's not core to how they think about things. Okay, now I understand you've had a frame of mind, but let's set the Wayback Machine of your mind to a year and a half ago or so. And how did you mesh Ann Capri with traditional Catholic thinking on economics and governance?
Well, my thinking was sort of, I'd been introduced to the sections of canon, obviously, in conversations with other Catholics that said, yeah, we need a state. No, free markets aren't really good, and that kind of stuff. So I was introduced it, and I was aware of it. But in my mind, the way I kind of rationalized it was that, well, the church has authority only in areas of morality, kind of. And I thought, well, this isn't, politics isn't morality, it's politics. And I viewed the two as sort of like ontologically separate categories. And in my mind, that was me thinking, well, okay, I can see this sort of being an ancient layover of when the church and the state were more intertwined. And so for the protection of the Catholic Church, they probably wanted to conjoin a state. And this is a moral teaching that could possibly be updated because it's really not pertaining to morals so much. And sort of that was sort of the same thinking on the economic front, because I'm thinking, well, this is economics, this isn't morals. And if anything, capitalism raises people out of poverty, which is good, and things like that. So that's how I sort of justified it. But
and so what caused you to start changing your mind?
Well, it was sort of
or seeing things different would be the more to the point.
Yeah, it was more so it was at first a turn towards more authoritarian leanings in terms of what I got from Hans Hermann Hoppe, who is also an anarcho-capitalist, although he'll run into some controversy with other anarcho-capitalists and things like that because of his positions, most notably his most famous meme, physical removal, which I'm still a fan of. I'm still a fan of some of his work, though, of course, I don't agree with it entirely. And his sort of thinking of how, there's sort of a cultural aspect that needs to be appreciated in order to uphold a voluntary society. If you, I actually haven't updated my channel description, but if you look at it, it says something about the preservation of a people who appreciate and practice liberty as a necessary precursor for actually establishing a free society and stuff. And so that was me getting into a little bit the fact that, there are really only certain groups of people that appreciate freedom and its uses. And so it's important to sort of preserve those people. I wasn't necessarily a racial bent at first, although it did sort of morph into that for a little bit when, at the same time, the whole Crown Tea drama was blowing up. And so I got introduced to people like Ryan Falk, aka half of the alternative hypothesis. And so it did take on a slight racial bent for some time as well. But it was generally just you got people who appreciate freedom. That's great. And let's physically remove the rest of them. And then, if you want to ask me more questions, I could go on for a little bit more.
No. That's a good way of looking at it. And Derek here is still an ANCAP, so I'm just going to be curious about perspectives here. I genuinely, it is interesting too, because I came to my way of viewing things, I tend to like the Catholic way of looking at things, although there is more than one. But, I came to Catholicism late in life, and it does tend to just embrace the fact that there are hierarchies and that you want functional hierarchies because you will have hierarchies, which, by the way, is, kind of like the whole Jordan Peterson lobster thing. It's true. Catholics, but to me, it was like, it's not because it's to impose hierarchies. It's the natural order of things. It's what will happen if you do things right, unless you have. And see, when I look at anarchists and even our anarcho-capitalists, or really any variety of libertarianism at this point, I used to be a libertarian. You're not recognizing that some people are really, really, really bad. And some of those really, really, really bad people are capable of amassing mass fortunes and or mass, armies and slaughtering people. it is natural. That's every variety of libertarian or anarchism just seems to be based on this implicit assumption of human altruism that doesn't take, I don't know, moderns would call it sociopathy, narcissism and tribalism, okay, or what we would just call good old-fashioned Satan's ways or demonic, or however you want to look at it. Bad people are going to amass large quantities of cash and rage economic warfare on you if they want to, and bad people are going to raise armies and try to crush you or eat you. And this is why I look at all of it and I say, no, none of it works. Free market is like a second. I know this is going to sound crazy because I'm going to sound crazy. But free market has to come second. You can't place that first. It can't. Free market has to. Adam Smith, the great Adam Smith, the founder of free market economics, said that a free market would inevitably turn evil if it weren't governed by a strong morality and strict rules to keep the owners of business accountable to their communities, their employees, and to God. And that was Adam Smith. And libertarians and anarchists talk a good game about the market to me, but they put the market first. And you know what? The market gets you slavery. The market gets you murder for hire. The market gets you economic warfare. It gets you con artists. It gets you thieves. There's my rant. Either one of you feel free to respond.
May I offer a criticism?
No, sure. I am perfect.
Oh, okay.
You are not to contradict me. No, go ahead, man.
Yeah, so all those things you were describing, isn't that pretty much what we have now? And we do have a government?
Well, I guess...
Well, I would say we have a very dysfunctional government, and we need to fix it. Not just say, oh, just ditch it.
Well, well, is this... All right, I think this is... Okay. Is this a problem with government inherently, or is it more of a human nature sort of thing?
Well, I'd say it's a human nature sort of thing, but I'd say in sort of agreement with some of Nietzsche's moral analyses, when you don't have sort of something for humans to strive towards in terms of moral standard, in terms of like the massive decentralization you'd have under sort of, an Ancapistan kind of deal going on. Sorry about that. The deal would sort of be you need a higher standard of some kind to strive towards, and the decentralization you get in that type of scenario allows for sort of man to slouch down, is kind of how Nietzsche put it, to its lowest possible standing. And so if you don't have something to kind of keep people in check in some way or another, eventually it just kind of, it rolls downhill faster and faster. And I think that's sort of what you've seen in modern times, especially because we live in an era of great social decentralization where we have not only celebrity figures and big intellectuals vying to make their sort of morality the over morality of the populace. It's also come down to, institutions and government and things like that. And so we have all these different power centers vying for moral authority. And what you've seen in the process is people begin to think they're all illegitimate. And so when they try to make up their own morality, it ends up just being, very, very degenerate. And so you need sort of something to not only just try to keep people on the straight and narrow, but also give them something to stride towards at the same time.
I mean, I would argue that Christianity has kept humanity on, a relative straight and narrow for a while now.
Yeah,
why,
exactly.
Why abandon a good thing?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and that's some of the discussion, obviously, because it's been the rampant secularization of government since the Enlightenment has certainly brought about with it, since the abandonment of Christianity, a greater moral decay in society. And so you have exactly what you're seeing now. You not only see rampant sort of decadence and self-absorption and narcissism in our culture today, but you also see just a genuine sort of nihilism. And it's not the nihilism of sort of edgy teens who want to just fight the system or anything like that. It's a genuine sort of self-loathing and self-pity that people feel because they just don't see a larger picture. They don't see any meaning in the universe because they've been sold this sort of Sam Harrisite materialist metaphysic. And so because of that, they have nothing to reach for, and they'll slouch down to anything to, get a rise. Their life becomes simple hedonism. And that's why I think, that's why I've kind of come to understand the church's position on why a state is necessary. Maybe not the most interfering state, but certainly a robust state in some of its social controls, to be sure.
I believe what will happen without a formal state, and therefore under quote unquote anarchy, what will instantly happen is rule by strongmen. Just like because it is naturally how people do things. They do it instinctively. They form tribes and chiefs. They just do. This is how street gangs form. Street gangs are not an artificial entity. They're an organic, natural way of how people organize themselves in a lawless area. You will be ruled by thugs. And there'll be honorable thugs or dishonorable thugs, and some will become maybe even noble and maybe even develop into something like, a judge or a king or something. I mean, this is what people will do unless you design a system for them otherwise.
Yeah. And Hoppe kind of had one of the reasons Hoppe was so attractive to not only ANCAPs, but to a lot of people was he sort of instituted a privatized monarchy. He tried to essentially what he tried to do was justify monarchy in terms of this sort of liberal mindset where the commonwealth is essentially the monarch's property and he'll be a better ruler of it. And so Hoppe kind of saw the same thing you were talking about. And his idea was to sort of have voluntary kings of sorts to answer that problem. Now, there's a lot of complex sort of economics and philosophy that goes into it, although I don't think a lot of it works because I think some of it relies on the philosophical supposition that, that is sort of materialist and relies on people believing that, their main goal in life is, cheap 57-inch flat screen TVs from Walmart and, your Big Macs costing 5 cents less every 6 months or something. And if you don't buy into that, then it's very hard to sort of buy into Hoppe's libertarian case for monarchy. But I think there's a much better case for monarchy that can be made in terms of a spiritual one, like the old monarchs of divine right.
I actually think, and this is a subject change, but it goes into it. I've become, one of those people who's convinced that international bankers ultimately control everything. And that's because international bankers ultimately control everything.
Kooky conspiracy theorist.
No, really, I do not think that without a national currency, you can achieve a moral system. I think I can make a case for that even within Catholic, because honestly, whatever you want to believe, we don't control our currency. The Federal Reserve, is
Rothschilds are good people. I don't know what you're talking about.
Monsanto, they're great people. No question. And man, Glaxo, those guys at Glaxo just have the best in mind for all of us. But no, really, international bankers have so much power. There's this, I think, and to be clear, what I'm saying here is dangerous because politicians who talk this way tend to get killed. But I think it's a moral issue, and I think, I think Christians should take it more seriously. I actually think one of the reasons Christianity has a problem is that although it was exaggerated, the type of Christianity that characterized the religious right in this country, that sort of formless, gormless, equating God in the United States with the same thing, a sort of fundamentalist evangelical Christianity really turned a lot of people off. But but I think those people were manipulated and played too, because I was just watching a fascinating documentary that showed how post-war planners wanted to break up traditional religious communities, Catholic communities in particular, but also, any large immigrant groups united by religion. They went out of their way in post-war planning to try and break those up and make them move into the suburbs, which they did. And that was all economic planning. That wasn't explicitly stated government law. It was all economic planning, working with the international bankers to create home mortgage loans and stuff like that. And really, I mean, if you're going to get into economics and you think economic and free markets matter, people seem allergic to looking at the monetary system and who controls it. But it matters, because truly what I don't think I'm a tinfoil hatter to note just what one guy like George Soros has proven able to do. I really think what are you going to structure your own economics on seems to matter. I mean, I really would at this point love to go back to the gold standard, and they talk like you're nuts. But I think if you don't control your money supply, if you don't control your own currency, you are a slave to whoever does control the currency, especially in the currency market.
Well, I agree with Max, but partially because what he's saying is true, and partially because I have seen an uptick of advertisements trying to actually convince retirees to buy gold. So I think that there's signs, just like there are signs with the housing bubble crisis. There's signs that maybe the currency bubble might pop, or since 2001, it could be stated that the rare metals are themselves in a gold in their own bubble because of the economic crisis and people exchanging their gold for money in 2008 and stuff. So it's like there's a lot of things that could go wrong that would make gold kind of not obsolete, but it'd just be easier to trade.
Here's what I do want to say. I want to say that private ownership of gold and as a personal investment is not necessarily what I advocate at all. I have no great amount of gold. My point is that we currently accept and have taken it as dogma that we should use fiat currency. We have fiat currency. It just floats. It's not backed by anything. And of course, people have been objecting to that for 100 years, and they've been poo-pooed for 100 years. But at this point, it's looking very unstable. People are looking. A lot of entities are looking for something more solid than the dollar. And Derek was just pointing this out to me before the show. I'm sorry, the gay degenerate over there. He calls himself that, guys. I'm teasing.
He seems to have, wait a minute, you're degenerate and jumped out.
Oh, did we lose him? That's okay. He's a good friend. Degenerate and cap. Anyway, well, he was pointing it out to me pre-show, this whole petrodollar thing that's going on. What people don't know is that the U.S. kind of jiggered the oil market to its own favor economically, like in the
70s or so, when like Nixon was closing the gold window.
Well, and they basically got it so that I think it was even before this. No, they got it so that the U.S. dollar would be the standard currency all oil was traded in. The deal they made with the Saudis and all of that. And that really has allowed the U.S. a lot of leverage because all oil transactions are in dollars, ultimately. And China has announced that they're creating this currency that they will trade with oil in, and it won't be used by the everyday masses, at least not for now. I don't know what the future holds, but they have a petrodollar, a petrocurrency that will be backed one for one with gold, and they will trade oil in that, and so they are directly challenging the U.S. currency in that arena, and also and challenging the international bankers because that won't float. That will, it will float, but it will be a backed currency in gold. So China is doing this. And I honestly think it's time for us and other nations to start doing that, because I truly think fiat currency, there's a real problem with it. And continuing to say, even morally, and continuing to say, well, it's worked so far, so we should keep doing it, doesn't seem responsible to me anymore. What do you
Yeah, well,
guys think?
that's one of the holdovers I still sort of have from libertarianism, which is an idea in some sort of, you know, I don't know if it's necessarily that fiat currency is the problem, as opposed to government manipulated fiat currency that might be causing the problems. I've heard, for example, one of the debates I quite liked that I saw someone recently was economist Robert Murphy from the Mises Institute and George Selgin, both Austrians of a sort, but Selgin is what you'd call sort of a Virginia school or Hayekian Austrian, which is a little bit more orthodox than the Mises Institute, which obviously takes more from Mises and Rothbard, who were a good bit out there. But I'm all for.
I've read all of these guys. I've become skeptical of all of them, to be honest with you. But
Well, they're actually advocating for exactly what you're talking about.
at this point, who are the Austrian school currently?
Yeah, they've always been against. I think in general they've been against government. They've been against government control of currency, but I think they've also hated fiat currency specifically, especially the folks from the Mises Institute.
See, and I'm not buying it anymore either way. I want government control of currency. Straight up, I do.
You just don't want fiat currency, is what you're saying then?
No, well, yes and no. I mean, I'm something fair. I want it backed by something: uranium, gold, some kind of crypto that can't be hacked, whatever it is, something solid. And I want much more limits on the charging of interest, because here's the thing: I get tired of hearing we don't want government to control, because we already have individual multi-billionaires who are not subject to any government, who have been known to just wreak economic warfare on, take out entire countries. It is not a conspiracy theorist to say that George Soros has done this. He's wanted.
Oh yeah, no, he's an economic terrorist, I think is what they called him, right?
Economic terrorist, yeah, he really is one. And he's not the only one. In fact, I will recommend something I think everybody should watch and think hard about when engaging in abstract economic thinking, about, what system is ideal, what do we want. I think this is this will give you a clearer idea why I, at least, am skeptical when I merely hear that the problem is letting governments do things. This is called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Now, this book was a New York Times bestseller only about 10, 11 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. Raved by all the mainstream news sources, Wall Street Journal, all of that. So this guy is not fever swamp stuff. You can go look up who John Perkins is. They kind of try to he's not the toast of the town the last 10 years, but he was and he has updated his book, but Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And his job, and the job of others he worked with, was to do things like go to a country with a newly elected president and sit down and have a briefcase with on the order of $200 million, and saying, okay, so here's the deal. I'm going to give you this. Also, I'm giving you this guarantee that at any time you and your family get an eject button and a golden parachute to wherever you want in the world, you and your family will be forever safe. If you decide you need to give up power, or we need to get you out of here, and you're going to be doing certain things we need you to do, and we're going to need you to agree to do them, or you will be dead. And doing things like that in multiple countries with multiple other people who do that for a living, working primarily for, you can say government, because CIA and KGB and others are involved in things like that, but bankers and big corporations primarily. And you cannot say that it is government that gives them that power when they have the ability to control governments. And you can say, well, one government gave them that, but no. I truly read the book, or at least watch this interview, Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins, because this guy is for real. Look him up. He's as legitimate as you can get. And this is what he did for a living. The story of how he even managed to get his book published and the trouble he had there was interesting in and of itself, because he's in an industry where you're not supposed to talk about it. But he had managed to have every non-disclosure he'd ever signed either expired or addressed sufficiently for him to be able to just speak openly about what he and others in his profession did for decades, destroying governments, using economic power and that kind of threat. And so when looking at any abstract theory of how we ideally want markets to work, people will do this, and rich people will do this. And give them less government, and rich people will still do this. Get rid of the government, and rich people will still do this.
Yeah, well,
I just think it's so important to know that. I'm sorry I'm ranting, so I'm going to shut up now.
No. I mean, that's a fair point, and it's one of the reasons I'm not an ANCAP anymore, is because, you know, you can get people with enough wealth to subject it to a fair amount of manipulation, doing things like whatchamacallit, George Soros has done. I think there's a fair case, though, to defend the libertarian position somewhat, that the things he's been able to do because governments have been letting him get away with it, so to speak, at least like the big international players like China, Japan, the US, most of Europe, and things like that, because they don't really care about the Southeast anyway. And, you know, potentially in a free market situation, you might have sort of privately built-in rules to prevent this kind of thing. But you're right. I think in general that people will always find loopholes. People will always get the best lawyer to poke all sorts of holes in things. So even if you go to some private McCourt TM and you have like your McLawyer TM and you try to like take down George Soros, you know, even without the help of the state, I don't think it's a good thing. But I do agree, like in general, that, you know, central banking is something that's just got to go, because they not only do they hold too much power, and they're using it maliciously. And two, I think there's a case that you can do the things that a central bank does, which I do think to some degree are necessary, but I don't think you need a central bank of sorts to do it.
Yeah, that's one of the, and just moving toward a currency that is backed by something is a start to that. You know, I mean, people can still manipulate it, right? The worry there is, of course, let's say you choose gold. Well, now somebody discovers a massive gold deposit nobody knew existed anymore. Now all of a sudden they're powerful and they can manipulate. Nothing's perfect. I do think that's the allure of crypto done right. Cryptocurrency really, any kind of decent cryptocurrency that's invented, capped at a finite amount. There can never be more than a certain amount of bitcoins. You can still manipulate the market, but there can be no sudden discovery of trillions of bitcoins that nobody realized were there before. But yeah, I really think it has to be looked at. And I tell you what, I mean, if you look at what's going on geopolitically, it really is more, even George Soros has said openly that the dominant ideology today on the planet is nationalism. Nationalism being the generic term for anti-globalist, i.e. people anti-him. And
I wish it were.
Well, it were that simple. I mean, I am much more sympathetic to nationalist forces. Nationalists, quite a few want a national currency, and I'm not sure I would be against them. I've had others tell me I should be against that, but I don't think I am. I just think you'll get killed if you try. You better be careful.
Yeah, well, I think I think the big problem is with the Soros types, and like I'm sort of an economic nationalist now. Another reason I kind of left libertarianism is because I've been supporting Trump's policies and things like that. But I think there's more to the world and national politics than just economics, and I think that's a very central point to make in the against the libertarian case, sort of, because I know libertarians don't expressly say that, you know, that all there is materialism and like you have to be a materialist and X, Y, and Z. They don't make all those philosophical claims, but it's always justified in terms of material things. Like you have the freedom But you have the freedom to do what exactly? Yeah, well, you have the freedom to buy all these guns and defend yourself and things. And all right, that's cool, that's nice. But why? It's like, well, you can go live a life where you have cheap technology to inundate you with all this awesome stuff and video games and whatnot. But it's like, okay, why? And it's not necessarily a fault of libertarianism for not advocating some greater spiritual meaning, but it is certainly something you have to look at when you see it being advocated, because it's always justified in material terms, and there isn't anything really higher to it. At least when you have Republican sort of religious neoconservatism, you have something where it's like, all right, well, this is our nation. We're under God. We're serving God. We're meant to live lives with our, religious, spiritual convictions, what have you, and the things of that nature. And so you can kind of justify it like that. But that's something lacking in libertarianism, which also I think contributes to the sort of moral slouch you see a lot of them in. Like, this isn't the case with all libertarians, of course, but many, many libertarians are just out and out degenerates in terms of like their drug habits, terms of the sexual hedonism. It's it's not a good scene mostly. Like,
and there's a huge amount of market principles, which they'll just use the word market principles to justify any avaricious, greedy, self-exploitive. It's market principles, free choice.
Exactly.
To sell us the idea that corporations are people. Like, okay, you just get nut,
yeah. Also, Max, I don't know if you know this, but you've been clicked on Eric for a while, and that's the only thing that's been appearing on the stream. I don't know if you know that.
Really? No. Oh, I'm sorry. It's supposed to be automatically flipping. I don't know why it's not.
I think you might have just clicked on him.
Eric seems very angry, and so he's very compelling to look at. No.
There we go. Okay, I think it's better now.
I'm angry all the time at everything and everyone.
Well, the thing that I think is most appealing to for libertarianism is because the logical outcome is a cyberpunk dystopia, and if and all these political ideologies we're looking at today, it just seems like our choices are dystopias, and it's like, okay, well, which dystopia would I rather live in, rather than thinking that the party will actually do anything.
No, this is why some people are iffy about Rod Dreher, and I'm not quite sure what I think either. I find very appealing. Rod Dreher has written that Christians should basically, serious Orthodox type Christians, and he's very broad in his use of Orthodox types, kind of the way I do it too. Like, even if you're a Protestant, well, please be a denominational Protestant with be a Methodist and be a real serious Methodist at least that level of orthodoxy, at least, right? Or a Lutheran and just be a real serious one, right? Mm-hmm. Go back to that and form communities based around that, and try to actually withdraw from modernity and rebuild, make a new Christian Renaissance centers, basically, because that's what would happen if Christians were allowed to do that. The only problem I have with it is that just makes targets. So yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm paranoid, man. But
no, you're definitely not. Like,
no.
Well, I'll just say this quickly. I think anybody who tried to go out and communally live in some sense, like, you're immediately, like, unless you're sort of like established a lifestyle like that. Like, if you're like the Amish or some certain like sort of sect that has a reputation of, oh, they've lived out in this part of the country forever, and this is their tradition, and X, Y, and Z.
Oh, like, yeah, and like the Mennonites in them who are
the Mennonites. Yeah, it's like,
yeah, the Mennonites are more liberal. They use technology and stuff like that, but they still have they're in the same kind of league as that.
Yeah, like I've been to, like, the Lancaster, Pennsylvania Dutch area a good bit. And so I know there's like a certain year which some of them chose to like cut off what technology they'd be using. And like some chose a later date, some chose a kind of earlier date. And that's kind of where you see the split. But like, unless you have sort of that tradition of sort of living like that, people are gonna think you're gonna think you're weird. Like, if you're just like
you're gonna have to go and do that, right? Although there is a traditionalist Catholic movement that is doing that, is going out in mostly rural areas, right, and is actually adopting like some old Vatican recommended dress codes even, and trying to build self-sustaining communities. And almost like becoming Catholic Amish a little bit. It almost looks like, I mean, or Amish, Catholic Mennonite almost, right? Believe it or not, the Vatican does have dress codes they recommend for Catholics, including how women should wear their skirts, and they shouldn't wear pants at all, and it's largely discarded. It's not strictly required, but they're trying to live by stuff like that.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that sounds actually awesome, cool. I would actually, I dig that, but I wouldn't live there, probably.
Yeah. Well, I'd be interested to see how far it gets, because to kind of talk about, the paranoia, quote unquote, I think you feel. I don't think it's really paranoia. I think when you go out and you're a group that tries to sort of live against the norm like that, you're painting a target on your back to a large extent, and you're, fortunately Catholicism, even though it doesn't have a history of particularly aesthetic living amongst its lay people, you still have sort of a history of some monks, living up in the mountains, just studying and things. So it's not too out of the ordinary, but you're very much at the whim of the government in terms like, well, is this community a cult? Can we frame them in some way? Something like that, X, Y, Z. Because like the fear is, the things that were happening at, like, to use like the really controversial example, Jonestown was kind of up in the air about what they were doing and what was happening, and also the kinds of deviancy that went on there, and whether or not like things were happening at all. It's a huge discussion. But one thing for sure was that when the government decided that, all right, these are cultists, we're going to take them down, nothing really stopped them. Nothing made them take pause, like, why are we shooting people as they're running out of the door when the building's on fire? Why are we like dropping explosives in on this building and shit like that? Like, once they decided Jonestown had to go, and like this fiasco was like had to be getting rid of and covered up, it was gone. And so, this, even if you think that what the people of Jonestown were doing was completely wrong, that sort of like state sanctioned mass execution, I don't think is something you genuinely have to be worried about if you're forming a community like this. So it's like, be wary at all times.
Well, there's some things about Jonestown that we could get into, like their politics and whether or not that was actually a Christian church.
For sure.
No, but it's still an example of what can happen.
But for what I would like to, my analogy, right, is the South. I'm from the South. The fighting atheists has been kind of a tradition for me since I was little. But it's there are these communities that established themselves in 1920s, 1910s, 1800s as Christian communities. They're actual towns. There are Christian towns all across the South, right? That's what everybody who lives in that community is. And, it's their shared bond. That's the shared community thing. And you have these activist groups now going after these communities because in their public schools, how the communities are, the culture of the communities bleeds into the school. And that's another thing you have to worry about as far as government, because people with enough money and enough backing can make the government make you go away and make you assimilate into whatever they think is right.
Yeah, or just like with the thing about Jonestown is they didn't even bother trying to do that. It was just like, all right, we've declared these people enemies of the state, and we're gonna just fucking absolutely destroy them. There wasn't really much of a second thought or consideration of mercy. It was just, these people are now our enemy. They gotta go. And not only did they go, but they masterfully, well, not masterfully, this wasn't their best cover-up job, but they did a pretty good job at covering up the fact that, they just executed people trying to flee the building as they were breaking in. They obviously planted some sort of explosives and killing even more people. Like, they've done a very good job covering up the fact that most of, if not all of the killing that took place in Jonestown was done exclusively by the government. And so, that's basically my cautionary tale, is that if you want to do this, obviously your politics are going to be radically anti-modern and anti-liberal and things like that. So you're going to be on the government's watch list. You just can't be, unfortunately, you have to watch how vocal you are about it, because that's what's going to draw attention to you, and that's what's going to make the government wonder, should we be doing something? And you better hope they don't want to do something about you.
Yeah, exactly. It's perilous times we're in. It really is. And the only thing I can say is that if we're faced between two forces, I'm on the nationalist side. It's very dangerous times, though. In fact, I go by the namesake of my confirmation saint, Maximilian Mary Kolbe, and he lived in times not that much unlike what we're seeing now. Even before the war broke out, all sorts of conflicts, swirling conflicts of power and swirling conflicts. Actually, by mentioning this, it was just like he acted. I mean, you look at what the church is putting out on him now, and it has a certain gloss on him as like almost just endlessly radiantly kind figure. But actually, I've heard at least an interview or two with people who knew him, and plus you just look at his history. He had a reputation for being really fierce and just going to battle with people all the time. It's how he earned the title Maximilian, and that his zeal was so great. All right, but he fought Freemasons, he fought communists, he fought Nazis, he fought Imperial Japanese. Of course, not with the word, not with weapons, but I mean, he did all of that. I mean, he died at Auschwitz, but before he died at Auschwitz, he had tangled with Imperial Chinese who wanted to stop him. He had specifically formed something called the Militia Immaculata to fight the heresy of Freemasonry wherever it was to be found. He was a real champion of the faith, and he was facing all these types of forces. He was. What are we fighting now? Fascists, communists. Well, we call them social justice warriors, but that's, they're commies. Much of the alt-right really are just more or less Nazis. They're fascistic. Anarchists, always part of the mix. I mean, it's perilous times. All of this is part of the mix again, just like it was in that period between World War I and II.
Well, there was a lot of factors that happened 200 years ago that also impacted that. It's like the parallel to now is our great sin of 200 years ago. People were trying to use that against us, and it's like when you really investigate that time period, and then you investigate the 10 or so years before that time period actually happened, you can actually see how there's a lot of political turmoil in that time as well, before the Civil War broke out. And it wasn't just about slavery. It was about how it was when the nation was very new. So they didn't know how much power the federal government should have. And the Civil War essentially was what decided who had more power, the federal government or the states.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, you know what? We've been going about an hour, and I think we try and cut it at an hour. So this has been a lot of fun. So tell you what, tomorrow night, I believe, we have JMD Apologetics on for a get to know you session like this one. So looking forward to having him on. On Sunday, I'm going to have a stream of where John C. Wright, me, Davis Arini, and we all give our testimony, all former atheists who turned Catholic. And we have, but one of Davis's friends, a heathen who's into some fairly deep seeming Nordic paganism, also told her conversion story. So we're going to have that up on Sunday. So once again, we are here every night. So please remember, you can always find us on redpillreligion.com if anything else goes wrong. And otherwise, here on YouTube, give us a like and give us a subscribe. And God bless everybody.